Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. One of the big conversations regarding OT security revolves around the use of tools. Some have too many, others not enough, and everyone is searching for the funds to manage and obtain the right tools for a constantly evolving threat landscape. The key to understanding which tools are right for you and your organization not only demands a comprehensive understanding of your OT environment's assets, APIs, and connections, but a working situational awareness. To that end, it's been a while since I hit you all with some stats, so here's some knowledge, courtesy of ABI and Palo Alto's State of OT Security Report. It shows that 75% of industrial organizations state they have experienced a cyber attack on their OT environment, and 25% have experienced a shutdown as a result of such an attack. 70% of these attacks originated in the IT environment. But despite all efforts to the contrary, 40% of respondents still say that their OT and IT teams are frictional, and only 12% feel they're aligned. When it comes to the double-edged sword of tools that can help defend their environment or be used as a weapon against it, 74% say AI attacks against OT are a critical issue, but 80% state that AI will be key to stopping OT attacks. Similarly, while the enhanced operational benefits of faster connectivity is on the rise, 70% of respondents saw 5G devices as a growing element of the OT threat vector. The report also shows that 87% of industrial cybersecurity leaders believe that zero trust is the right environment to securing OT environments. And finally, 74% of executives surveyed believed regulatory actions will continue to increase in the next 2 years. Here to discuss some of these topics and more is Sharon Brizinov, Director of Research at Claroty's research arm, Team 82. Claroty is a leading provider of ICS and OT security with partners that include Rockwell, Schneider Electric, and Siemens. Sharon, thanks so much for joining us, and welcome to Security Breach. Thought we'd jump right into it here a little bit. You guys are in a unique situation in that you work with a lot of industrial automation companies and ICS environments. I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, as this OT landscape sort of expands and grows with more connections, are there any certain vulnerabilities that you guys are seeing pop up maybe a little more frequently?
Yeah, so as we move forward, there is this terminology of OT and IT convergence, which basically means that the OT becomes a little bit closer to the IT network. So it's not longer very separated or isolated or air-gapped. It's becoming hyper-connected. So we're seeing much more devices being connected at both sides of the networks between the IT side and the OT side. And these devices that kind of connect these networks expand the potential attack surface for attackers to gain more access and more exploitability into the network. So, for example, if one of the devices is using an outdated firmware, it's a great platform for attackers to abuse this fact and maybe exploit the outdated firmware in order to access this device and maybe expand a little more behind this device and maybe jump to other devices that are nearby, eventually getting to the OT network.
Now, you bring up a couple of interesting points there, and these are conversations we've had before, but it seems like we always come back to them a little bit. The last thing you talked about there is frameworks, and maybe not staying up to speed and updating that framework a little bit. Is that something you're seeing more often, and what is kind of the antithesis of that? Why are we struggling maybe to keep pace?
In modern times, we have lots of devices. We have lots of different software to manage these devices. And asset owners need to keep up on the pace and update all the devices and all the peripheral software and all the management software and all the analytics software and all the monitoring software. So there is a lot of different items and devices and softwares to monitor and keep track of and update everything. So it's very difficult to update everything and make sure that all the devices are fully patched, fully upgraded, using the latest firmwares, because there are just a lot of them. And on top of that, sometimes if asset owner wants to upgrade their devices or patch their devices, they would need to create some kind of a shutdown window. So kind of closing down the shop floor or the factory in order to do the upgrades. And obviously shutting down the factory, even if it's for a few minutes or maybe an hour, costs money. And this is a very difficult situation for all the asset owners, mostly because of how many devices there are, and also the need to kind of shut down the factory while they're doing the patches and upgrades.
Now, I'm glad you brought up patching. That's a huge concern right now because we're detecting so many more of these vulnerabilities, and the software and the automation suppliers are coming out with these patches to help manufacturers especially. Have you seen folks really trying to implement patching strategies into their cybersecurity planning, or where's the right place to implement that to try to make sure we're doing the patching, but not, like you alluded to, not shutting everything down all the time?
Yeah, so it's a great question. How to correctly manage patching and upgrades. So this is a complicated answer actually, because many asset owners and many factories are struggling with this situation. Now, the key points here are, first of all, to create patching windows at least once a month or 2 months. So everybody knows in this 1 hour or 2 hour patching window, the factory will be shut down. Usually it's on weekends, maybe Sunday, maybe Saturday. So everybody are aware of this. And second of all, they need kind of a visibility to what devices and what firmwares and software versions they have in their factory. So for this point, they would need kind of a visibility into their factory. Visibility in terms of what devices do I have, what version each device has, what patches are available for what device. Do I need to patch? Now, these answers can be answered using a visibility platform, some kind of a software that keeps track of all the different devices, all the different firmwares and softwares in the factory. And this is exactly what we do in Claroty. We have our CTD, Continuous Threat Detection platform, and this is a product that helps asset owners to gain visibility into their factories, into their networks, especially OT networks, and understand what devices they have and what vulnerabilities each device contains and what patches they need to apply to each device.
Yeah, that visibility, that continues to be a huge challenge in the OT environment. So is something else you alluded to kind of off the bat, which is IT and OT trying to work together a little better. It seems that's also something that's been, well, probably for the last decade, those two sort of banging heads and not always wanting to work in conjunction as much as we would like. What are some of the things you're seeing there in terms maybe of progress that's been made, best practices to take to sort of bring those groups together, or any other observations you maybe have on IT and OT and trying to get them to work together a little better?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in recent years, we've seen a lot of different companies and security vendors trying to push for visibility into OT networks. And the reason for this is because keep tracking of different devices in the OT network is not an easy task at all. One would need to understand the different SCADA protocols and OT protocols in order to gain some understanding of what devices they have, where do they communicate with or to, and so with the recent years, with the development of visibility product for OT networks, we have seen much more integrations between the IT side of the network to the OT side of the network. And why is that? Because usually these visibility products that keep track of all the devices and all the firmwares and all the software versions in the OT network, these products they contain integrations to different IT devices and IT services that help them to keep track of more devices in the kind of the DMZ between the OT network and the IT network. So we're seeing, what I'm trying to say here is we're seeing a lot of connectivity between the OT and the IT network. And with that, we're seeing much more products and software solutions that help to keep track of all the connections and all the devices you have on both sides and how they integrate together and how they communicate together.
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up tools, and that's something everybody wants to talk about, but it's also a little bit of a point of debate too, in terms of how do you decipher which tools are right for you? There's so many out there. We've heard situations where manufacturers are doing the right things and investing in these tools, but then they've got duplicates, triplicates, and it's creating more confusion than clarity. What has been your experience in maybe helping folks or guide them through that journey in terms of selecting tools, knowing how many you need, all of that?
Yeah, again, it's a good question, and the answer is always a bit complex because it really depends the type of the network that you're talking about. Depends the architecture of the network, the layout, what's connected inside the network, what devices do you have, and what platforms and what security aspects do you expect from the tools that you're looking for. Usually the first thing to do before bringing up a lot of tools is again visibility. You want to understand what do you have in your network, what do you need to battle, like what do you need to do in your network based on the devices that you have. So the first thing to do is to gain visibility into your network. What devices do I have? What kind of software versions do I have in the network? What kind of computers and maybe IoT devices do I have in the network? So today it's not just about one PLC or one HMI. You have PLCs and HMIs and computers, in most cases Windows-based computers, and you have IoT devices, and you also have security cameras, and you have door access controls. So you have all of these devices in your network, and there are probably many other devices that you're not even aware of. So once you gain visibility into what devices you have in the network, you would want to map the connections between them. Okay, so I have this door controller, which is in our example an IP-based device that is communicating to a Windows server. Why? Because in the Windows server you have this software that manages all the employees' identifications, so the door will open whenever they put the tag. So now you have this connection, and maybe it also connected to the camera because you want to record who's entering the building. So you want to build up all the connection map and to see what devices are communicating to what other machines or devices and move along from that. So you really start to build all the devices you have in the network, all the connections. And now you want to monitor these connections and you want to enforce some policies on these connections. So now we're entering the firewalls situation. So, the full answer is very complex because each security component in the network is supposed to handle different type of security enforcement. For example, firewalls should enforce policies and enable or do not enable communication between two devices or machines, etc.
Yeah. You keep talking a lot about visibility, which is obviously very pertinent to what we're trying to what we deal with, and what a lot of industrial organizations are still struggling with is that visibility. And a lot of it starts, again, to some of the comments that you were making there about getting an asset inventory and understanding everything that is part of that threat landscape. We're still struggling there too, and that seems like the very first step in really putting together a kind of framework or plan. What do you think is the dynamic there? Why is it still hard to really get a real accurate asset inventory? Is it still a novel thing? Is there just too much stuff? Are we still seeing some of that IT-OT divide come in there? Or what do you feel is the dynamic there?
So there is this saying goes that if it's something, it will be powered. If it's powered, it will be connected. So I'm not sure who said this, but basically this saying means that in modern times and obviously in the future, everything will be connected. Everything will be part of a network. And we're seeing this even today. We're seeing a lot of IoT devices that you cannot even imagine that exist in your building, in your apartment maybe. So you can control the lights because the lights are hyper connected. You can monitor the washing machine. You can monitor your refrigerator. So obviously in factories, the situation is much more complex because usually, at least new factories, are contain these modern BMS system that contain a lot of different sensors and devices and IoT devices that are all hyper connected. So visibility is a key point here because you cannot protect against something that you're not aware of. So you first of all you must find all the devices, and as you said, you must have a good asset inventory. And to do this, you need to look for all the devices in the network, and it's a difficult task because there are so many of them. And each day, one of the factory employees decided to bring his daughter's iPad, and this daughter's iPad apparently had this malware. So now he connected this iPad to the Wi-Fi network, and so there are a lot of different examples of why it's very important to understand what you have in the network, because only then you can block or you can enable communication between these devices. So again, this is why visibility is a key point here.
Yeah. So not to keep harping on this, but it is an important conversation to have about visibility. And I think I know how you're going to answer this, but if we're struggling with all these visibility challenges, do we want to start cutting back or limiting some of the connectivity that we have? Are we over-connected in some way, shape, or form with all of these different new IoT assets on the plant floor?
It's very subjective answer, but I think so. I think we've come to a point that everything is hyper connected. Every toothbrush is connected to the Wi-Fi. I think it's crazy, but putting this aside, this is the reality, and we cannot turn away from the reality. And we're moving forward to the future. And in the future, everything will be connected, even your door in the entrance of your apartment. The windows will be, maybe today even, they're connected to the Wi-Fi. So everything is hyper connected. So we cannot look away. And because we cannot look away, because this is the reality, we need cybersecurity solutions to protect against unauthorized access to these devices. And we need a way to monitor these devices, and also a way to limit access from and to these devices. So this is why, first of all, we need visibility to understand what devices do we have, and then we need to enforce policies on the communication between these devices and other devices, and maybe the internet. So we'll be sure that no unauthorized access will take place, and no malicious access will take place as well.
Yeah, it's interesting with all the regulatory movements, because it feels like we almost need to break something before we can put those things in place to understand how to limit that from happening. And I think that's a real source of frustration between those within the cybersecurity community and those in the regulatory community, and trying to figure that out. We've been talking a lot about tools. We've been talking a lot about information. It kind of bleeds into what you do there at Claroty. I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with Claroty, but maybe not so much Team 82, which is where you work. Maybe you could give us kind of an overview a little bit of the company and some of the stuff that you're up to.
Yeah, sure. So Claroty is a cybersecurity company with main focus to protect critical infrastructure. So our goal in Claroty is to understand what devices you have in the most critical networks, for example, the OT networks or hospitals, and understand what devices do you have, what firmware versions do you have, what software versions do you have, and kind of give the asset owners and the factory owners visibility into their network. You have, for example, this device, it contains outdated firmware. You need to patch it because this and that CVEs or vulnerabilities are applicable to this device. So we kind of help to gain visibility and prioritization into what devices should be patched and how. So this is what Claroty do. Myself, I'm a director at Team 82. Team 82 is the research group at Claroty. And in the research group, we're trying to understand what are the risks and what are the threats that these devices in the OT network, in the hospitals, what risks do they bring whenever people and asset owners connect them into the network. So the way that we research, the way we approach the threat research is by understanding how these devices operate. And this usually means we're doing an extensive research into these devices, into understand how do they work, what type of risks do they bring to the table whenever you connect them, what type of vulnerabilities do they contain. So usually we're starting, whenever we start a new research on a device, we research it, and we're starting a vulnerability research to understand how potentially would attacker attack this device and exploit this device to gain unauthorized access. So we come up with a very extensive research into a lot of different OT devices and IoT devices to find vulnerabilities and report these vulnerabilities, disclose these vulnerabilities to vendors. So the vendors will issue patches so our customers could apply these patches before attackers will exploit these devices.
Very interesting. You know, one of the things that you guys recently did, you sent over a report that you did about the Blackjacks group. They issued a malware attack. I thought it was really interesting. Number one, all the inner workings of it, but also because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is a group based in Russia that attacked a Russian manufacturer, which is not something that we typically see. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that report and some of the things you learned from it. It's a pretty interesting situation.
Yeah, sure. So the Blackjack Group is actually associated with Ukraine. So again, we're not sure exactly if they're Ukraine based or some other place based, but usually, according to the media, this group is associated with Ukraine. And recently, what happened, again, according to what this Blackjack Group published, is they hacked critical infrastructure station in Russia, in Moscow, and not only deployed their tools inside the network, but also destroyed a lot of critical infrastructure devices, including sensors and computers and servers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're going to link to the report. Definitely encourage folks to check that out. A lot of things, a lot of takeaways from that. And it sort of opens up to a broader question too, Sharon. I know we could talk forever just on this topic, but maybe you can give sort of a summary take on this rise of these sort of hacktivist, state-sponsored groups that are going in focusing on a particular geography or a political opponent, but the impact spreads so much because they're attacking industrial control systems. I mean, I'm sure you're very familiar with the Unitronics PLC hack and what that ended up doing. Hit water treatment plants here in the U.S. that were not even an intended target potentially. So what are you seeing there in terms of how these groups are maybe adjusting their tactics, how they're growing, or some general observations?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're seeing a lot of, in the recent times, we're seeing a lot of different OT hacking groups and hacktivist groups trying to attack OT devices. But usually these OT devices are internet exposed. So it's very easy to reach those devices while doing internet scans or using some kind of a public search engines like Showdown or Census. So you can actually get a list of all the internet exposed devices of a certain type. So usually these groups are kind of opportunistic groups. They will not invest a lot of time in doing the heavy lift research and to find new 0 days and new vulnerabilities. Usually they will exploit 1 days, meaning vulnerabilities already previously disclosed. Or they will just connect to these devices that are not protected with any password or any security mechanism and will play with the different configurations and settings because again, they're not protected. So, for example, in the Unitronics case, we've seen this group, which currently, according to intelligence, everybody believes they are linked to Iran. And what they did actually is they got a list of all the internet exposed Unitronics PLCs, and they basically just connected to these devices and did what we call a project download procedure, which basically means they replaced the logic on the device with their own logic, and their own logic was only kind of deface attack, was just to replace the image on the PLC. So it looked very scary because in the morning, whenever the operators and the engineers got to the factory, they saw a scary image on their PLC and HMI of Unitronics, and it looked like somebody hacked them. But in reality, this hacking activity was only to remotely connect to the device and changed and modified the logic on the device. So again, it's not a very complicated attack scenario, but it is scary because these devices are connected to the internet, and which means everybody can connect and cause some kind of damage.
Yeah. Well, it was very successful and far-reaching in terms of the impacts. And it also, I always worry, whenever we look at these types of attacks, it sort of lays a blueprint down for other hackers and gives them ideas as well in getting into these industrial control systems for ransomware, for denial of service attacks, whatever the case may be. In looking at these, we're always drawn to the fact of what the hacker was able to accomplish. Sometimes we miss out on some of the lessons learned. When we look at these two hacks, or any of them that you've been exposed to, what do you think are some of the bigger takeaways? What are some of the areas maybe we're getting better at as a result of these types of attacks?
Yeah, so for sure, these types of attacks bring a lot of attention to OT devices. And I think the most impactful thing, the key point here is do not connect your OT devices to the internet. I think this is the main point here. And every time people exposed their OT devices to the internet, something bad happened. In the Unitronics, it was very clear. The Unitronics attackers just connected to all the Unitronics devices, PLCs and HMIs, and just modified the logic. So it's very obvious that the most important thing here is do not expose your OT assets to the internet.
Part of this was also some of the credentialing as well. I think they left some like admin or very simple passwords in play. Is that something that you're working with folks as well too, just to, whether it's double factor or more complicated passwords or whatever, is credentialing also part of that focus, or is that more of a low-hanging fruit that we've already gotten past?
Yeah, so I think it's a side effect. In many cases, for example, in the Unitronics case, in many cases, the password was left the default one, which is, again, very bad practice. But the number one key point here is do not connect these devices to the internet, because even if it contained default password, but it was not connected to the internet, that's not okay, but these devices were not being exploited. So it is important not to leave the default passwords. That's for sure. That a lot of different hygiene, security, best practices that anyone can follow. But the most important one is please do not expose these devices to the internet. Even if they have password, these devices are not, in most cases, are not meant to be internet exposed.
No, well said. One of the other challenges that we see a lot throughout cybersecurity is finding folks like yourself to fill these roles. So maybe I'd like to get your thoughts a little bit on, first of all, what's your background? How did you maybe come into this position in cybersecurity in the industrial sector? And are you seeing anything that's working out there in terms of attracting more people to these positions? Because, man, we need them badly.
So my personal background is I studied computer science. I developed different applications. I I was actually iOS mobile developer, so I developed a lot of applications for mobile. But I think if we want to bring more folks to get interested in cybersecurity, especially in OT, I think we need to raise the awareness of what is OT, what are the devices we find in OT, and how it helps us in our day-to-day lives. So I think if people would understand that all the water systems and all the electrical systems and all the transportation systems are controlled by OT devices, I think it will intrigue them and get them a little bit more interested in OT, and maybe it will bring them to want to read more about what our OT networks are and what devices do we have there are inside, and read more about cybersecurity concepts in OT networks.
No, I agree with you 100%. Making that personal connection, I think it's overlooked at times. We become very dependent on the simple things. Also, maybe exposing some of those things that are going on with these supply chain hacks and how that's impacting folks. You know, we've had a number of them in the food and beverage sector. And, well, if you want your, Dole oranges or peaches or anything else for a while here in the U.S., that was a big issue because of those types of hacks. And that's all ICS related.
Mm-hmm.
Wrapping up, Sharon, this has been great. Covered a lot of different stuff here. I'd like to get your thoughts looking forward here as we kind of look ahead. Are there any big trends that you're seeing that are really going to be impacting industrial cybersecurity? I mean, we've gone this whole time without talking about artificial intelligence. That's okay. Maybe this is the time to bring that up, or maybe some other things that you're seeing.
Yeah, so I think there are two new revolutions in ICS, in OT. The first one is not AI. This is the second one. The first one is cloud connectivity. So the first revolution that we're seeing today is hyper connectivity. So we're seeing more OT devices being connected and communicating with IT devices and IT services. But the new revolution that we're currently seeing in progress is moving up to the cloud. So we're seeing PLCs being managed, controlled, and monitored by cloud connectivity. So these devices, the PLCs, are actually communicating directly to the cloud, and this exposed the network to a whole new set of potential threats, which we do not have time to cover right now. But cloud connectivity in OT networks, this is happening. This is the reality, and this will be the future in the 2 to 5 years. The second revolution that we're seeing is bringing AI into OT networks. It starts today with analytics and data manipulations on the data acquisition and in the data that the PLCs are connecting and generating. But I personally believe that in the next few years, maybe it will take a bit longer than 5 years, we will see AI applications being integrated directly into the PLCs and HMIs to assist with smarter manufacturing, smarter efficiency. So all the things that we're enjoying today in the IT side will eventually get to the OT side as well.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, that would solve a lot of those secure by design concerns, a lot of those connections with new technologies to legacy equipment. That'd be really interesting to see that take place. So hopefully that definitely is the case. I want to circle back just a little bit when you talked about the cloud computing. Do you feel a lot of the security dynamics, are they going to be coming from the Microsofts and the Amazons of the world, or is this going to be something that's going to be a greater focus for the customer, the user?
So we're seeing today, actually, we're seeing a couple of vendors that are starting to implement cloud connectivity in PLCs. For example, S3 Codices. This is a major platform, a major vendor, European, a German one in the ICS market, and they already started to ship and produce ICS devices, PLCs that are fully cloud connected. So you can actually monitor, control your devices from the cloud. And we're talking about the OT network. So let me remind you that 10 years ago, OT networks were completely air-gapped. They were not connected to the internet, to the IT network. And today, not only they're connected to the internet, they're communicating and being controlled by cloud connectivity. So I actually can sit at home and control my entire factory, including changing the logic of all the machines from my home. So I think this is crazy, but this is the future, and this is where we're heading to, and this is why we need visibility.
Thanks, Sharon. And for more information on Claroty and Team 82, you can check them out at claroty.com. That's CLAROTY.com. Thank you for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can always reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Sharon Brizinov, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.